I'm actually being timed. That's intimidating. Hi, everyone. My name's Neil. I look after business development for Rewind. In case you don't know who we are an immersive content studio based out in St Albans. We're 8 years old, and we specialise in creating industry-defining content using creative technology. We pride ourselves on putting the narrative and the user experience first and utilising whatever technology is required to actually tell that story in the right way. And we're very proud of our history building narrative experiences for the likes of HBO, Sky. We recently did a Sky Curfew activation at the beginning of last year. And I'm here to talk to you about a project that we did in September of last year, which is firmly based on automotive content and the interactive kind of angle that we were taking together with Universal and Holoride. But I just want to give you a bit of context as to why I think it's important, why we think it's important. As we briefly touched upon just now, automotive cars are coming. Automotive cars. Cars.
Self-driving cars.
Self-driving cars. Cars that drive themselves. Are all coming. They are on their way, whether we like it or not. It might be 2, 5, 10 years' time. I recently had a bet with someone that my son, who's 4, may or may not even learn to drive. There's a chance that the current generation of people learning to drive now, or possibly even the last, which makes for a fascinating future with regards to automotive, and that is not just the ride-hailing firms like we talk about in just a second, like Lyft and Uber, but also the car manufacturers themselves. Interesting fact that I recently picked up is that really, if you consider it, the in-car entertainment angle hasn't really changed since the Galvin brothers, I love a good fact, put the first radio, the AM radio, in the Studebaker back in 1930. Essentially, we've iterated on that for the past 75 years. If it's not a radio, it's a DAB, and if it's not a DAB, it's your iPod, showing my age, or your phone. So really, we're at the kind of the next generation of what in-car entertainment's going to be, and the fact that it's going to be autonomous opens up a whole world of opportunity, specifically with interactive content. We're seeing a huge upturn in MaaS, or the mobility as a service, whereby there's a tremendous amount of integrated services out there that will offer you the opportunity to book not just your ride, but the tickets that you're going to see, your return journey, your meal, and arguably it's kind of a natural progression for that to move into entertainment. And there's no reason as to why those services out there and that are growing kind of monthly will soon integrate into what you are going to be doing in the back of your car. Hopefully not the front of your car, you'll be driving, but the back of your car as you get to your destination. We're all super comfortable with managing our kind of in-home entertainment using Apple or Google or whatever streaming service or media partner that you choose. And it is just a matter of time before that car, predominantly the back of that car, and then eventually every seat within that car just becomes another platform that IP and brands and technology owners will be clawing for your time. Kind of jumped ahead on a slide. So we're really interested in this. We've been talking to automotive firms for a good kind of couple of years about what they're doing in car. Primarily, a couple of years ago, car firms were starting to integrate VR into their production methods. McLaren use it. It saves a great deal of time, and that's a bit of a no-brainer. But soon, vehicle designers are going to be prioritizing in-car media consumption essentially over that first-person driver experience, because that becomes less of an issue. For me, driving a car, I want to drive the car and enjoy it. Again, for my son, he's probably not going to be bothered. He's going to be wanting to know what he can do while he's going from A to B. That journey offers up a tremendous amount of time that is ripe for harvesting. You played automatically. So we partnered with a German startup called Holoride. They've spun out of Audi. They're a small firm, and they're doubling down on what is the future of in-car entertainment. And I'm going to let the video do the talking because it makes more sense.
Soon, with autonomous driving, in-car entertainment will be the next big market.
That's why we started. Introducing HoloRide. HoloRide merges tomorrow's automobility with the fast-growing world of XR entertainment. Okay, we've all heard of VR roller coasters, VR gaming centers, and the like, but HoloRide takes it to the next level. It turns extended realities, IoT, and AI into a real thrill ride. How it works. HoloRide uses navigational information of a travel route and time, combines it with vehicle data from acceleration, stopping to steering, and links one-on-one to a selected virtual world. By the way, the real-time synchronization of the car movements with the artificial world significantly reduces the effects of motion sickness. We kicked off at CES 2019. Together with Audi, we arranged a spaceship ride at the famous Las Vegas Speedway. The people and press were thrilled. We were hailed Best of CES 4 times, reached over 75 million people, and generated more than 1 billion impressions within the first few days. HoloRide will be open to any car manufacturer and content creator in the world. So let's imagine games or educational journeys through different countries, eras, or future cities. Buckle up. Here we go.
So that's HoloRide's promotional video. As are all promotional videos, they come with a sense of extended polish, but they are absolutely correct. The inertia and the physics behind the movement of the car is truly representative within the VR experience. So they have their own independent SDK, Unity and UE4 Rewind. We're agnostic to both, but for the content now I'm going to run you through, we used UE4. It's a genuinely kind of mind-blowing experience when you step into the car after 6 months of building that content and then you put it into the platform, and then the car motion connects with your experience. So every corner you take, every time you go over a bump, every elevation is represented within the content. The stopping and starting at traffic lights, the ability to react to traffic, it is all represented and integrates with your experience. And it's kind of another level entirely. I realize I'm conscious of how many slides I put in, but we're ahead, so I'm just going to crack on.
Stop. Don't worry. Keep going, man.
So, last March, we spoke with NBC Universal and HoloRide about building Universal's first publicly accessible piece of HoloRide content. They're fascinated about what the future of rides are, obviously have Universal Studios. So, off the back of Marvel's Rocket Run they did at Las Vegas, we wanted to do something that was publicly available and would synchronize with Universal's Halloween Horror Nights, which is a really popular event in LA. So we were given the opportunity to work with Universal Studios Monsters IP. So we were given kind of, I say carte blanche because they said it carte blanche and then it became quite narrow, but as clients like to do. We had kind of carte blanche over the Monsters IP, and we were able to choose a character to basically write this experience around. A secondary character, they wanted to kind of bring someone into the light, and that ended up being the Bride of Frankenstein. So working very closely with the Monsters IP team out of Universal, who were licking their wounds a little bit after the Tom Cruise The Mummy, so they were glad to be doing something different. As a studio, we wrote the script, we concepted the whole experience, designed the look, the feel, the journey that she goes on as a character, and the entire environment. Obviously, we worked very closely with them, but as a creative studio, we were in control of all of that, which is fascinating. We also worked very closely with HoloRide because their SDK was literally box fresh, and it changed on a weekly basis as well. With regards to the HoloRide SDK, their end goal is that it is going to be a truly elastic experience. So if I get in a Uber, for example, and I book a ride to go from A to B, if that car chooses to go one way or the other because of traffic, their SDK will eventually support those two different routes. Through procedural level building, it will go, okay, I understand you're going a different route. I know there's a corner here. I'm going to plan that level for you so that when you take that left or that right or you stop at that traffic lights, the content will be ready. For the sake of Universal, we had to do what we would refer to as a locked route because of the early version of their SDK, but they now support Elastic in Unity, and we'll be supporting it in UE4. I'm just going to take you through kind of the creative and technical process that we followed in order to kind of create this, because as I briefly touched on before, with every new platform there is a whole set of new rules that we didn't know existed until you start deciding to put a game in the back of a car. We did a tremendous amount of art and design work. Our ECD, Daryl Atkins, is one of those frustratingly talented people in every single direction. So he put together a really beautiful look and feel of what we were going for. Did a tremendous amount of work about the environment and the tone that we were going for. We had to write, we wrote the story, so we had to give the bride a sense of purpose and a journey and what she was doing in your car. Why were you in her car? And that all comes as part of the experience. I won't spoil it, we'll come on to that in a minute. And then obviously the most important thing was, what's our bride going to look like? So we tried to push it. We were going for something a lot more modern, a lot more kind of dark but accessible. We kind of treated it through kind of some HBO eyes. You know, what would it be if someone was making a TV show for the masses now? We did a lot of really beautiful character concepts. Jordan, our concept artist, worked very closely with Daryl. And initially we were going for a kind of Zoe Kravitz, Zoe Saldana look that got really, really far through the creative process, and then actually we ended up kind of dialing it slightly back. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you have free reign, and then they actually make the decisions for you. So, but we ended up with our bride here, which was slightly more Angelina Jolie, and we were really pleased with her, and you'll see what she looks like in a little bit. We motion captured an actress to represent the animation data that we used for the bride. She was the only character that we had that you interacted with at any kind of great level. So we went all out in her fidelity, in her motion, in her speech. We had a brilliant voice actress that did her lines for us, and we were very lucky. And the performance really comes through, which hopefully you'll see shortly. This is really interesting, and this kind of gives you a bit of an idea about how we plotted out how to use the platform. So we have an introduction. As soon as the car pulls away from the parking lot, you have an intro and a narrative. You're in a car with a driver already, and he gives you some blurb about there being a rough night and there's a storm ahead and all that kind of horror cheese. And then, because we know how fast you're driving and where you are location-wise, we get to design some action points around those particular routes. So we set up 3 different chapters, really, dependent on where you are on the route and how you're progressing through the game. And it gives us an elasticity around that particular route that I'll show you in a minute. Did an awful lot of design and concepting around the monsters that attack you, and also the weapons that quickly became renamed device. Apparently, if you wave a gun around in LA, people get quite upset. So it's a device, it's not a gun. We quickly realized that because you're in a car, obviously you are in a vehicle in VR as well. So the lower kind of half of that environment is car. And it just has to be really based on how you kind of design those experiences. So we realized that everything has to kind of be up here. This is where your action is. So we very quickly moved away from the kind of the crawling, walking monsters and moved into ethereal kind of ghosts and baddies that can fly at you, because it makes better use of the space. And that's kind of one of the many interesting things that came about of this project, is learning to use the different space and the different kind of environments that the being in a car kind of provides you. This was a very early route that we did when we got all excited about working in LA. So we were hoping that we would be able to do an elastic route. So we picked, for no particular reason other than it's a really smart, posh hotel, the Chateau Marmont as our starting point in LA, and decided that there were 3 different possible routes to get to Universal Studios. So this was going to be our route that gave us 3 different options. Now, originally, Uber were going to be a partner in this. So the idea was that if you were within that kind of diameter of distance between the, Chateau Marmont and Universal, and you were going to go there for Halloween Horror Nights, you would open up your Uber app and there would be a Holoride option. And then you would book it through Holoride, and you would get in, stick your headset on, and then the Uber driver would go one of 3 routes, and your content would adapt. For long legal reasons that I can't go into, Uber didn't get their ducks in a row. And unfortunately, the Elastic SDK wasn't ready anyway. But that was kind of really early days. And actually, if you were to do it now, that's what you can do. And that's just 3 routes. It could be, you think about that green route that goes through the center of, or through North Hollywood, and there are tons of different one-way systems and traffic lights and roadworks, but the content will adapt accordingly, which is really cool. What we ended up with is this route. So you've got your starting point, which is our little kind of green pin here. And then, so that's Universal Studios. So we were actually just outside, based in the car park. Excuse me. And then you can see on the right-hand side the triggers. So because it was a locked route, within UE4, we set various different volumes that triggered the action within your experience. So if you weren't there because you were stuck behind traffic, or they have lots of trams that carry tourists around, sometimes you get stuck behind that. So, but the content would react accordingly and kind of give you something to do until you hit either wave 1 or wave 2 or wave 3, which is where you start kind of interacting and shooting the monsters. So what would happen is Holoride would drive a specially set up car, and they'd record us all of the different route data. So it's a mixture of GPS route data and physical IMU data that we then get back and plot into UE4, and that's how we kind of build out our route. And this is a kind of a very fast, this is me sat in the passenger seat, I should say, filming it. So this is our physical route. So all of this elevation and the turns and all these different corners are reflected within the experience. So it is a public road, so we had to be prepared for traffic jams, heavy traffic, etc. The Halloween Horror Nights kind of starts at around about 6 p.m. and goes through to midnight, so traffic wasn't too much of an issue. But we had to go around here. This is quite a busy junction, so we had to make sure that we catered for this. Then the driver has to put a security card in here and open the gate. All of this is seamless within the experience. Genuinely, you're in it, you don't know where you are until you get to the finish, and then you're back in the car park. It's a bit nuts. So Holoride would provide us the route data. We put it into UE4. That's kind of a rudimentary look of what the route looks like. We would set and cater for our kind of route spline, so we had to be careful. We found in testing that we would cut corners, or Universal Studios would put a sign up to push cars a different rave just for one day, which meant that we would end up driving through trees. So we had to do some adapting once we were on site. But we found after 6 months of work, when we got on site at Universal Studios, we were really surprised at actually how accurate the content was, and actually we only needed to adapt kind of 2 or 3 corners and a little bit here and there. The biggest problem that we found, which I'll come on to in a little bit, is we had some drift in the controllers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the route-wise, the data and how it's reflected in the SDK and UE4 was fantastic. So this is us just building out the town environment. We used Houdini to procedurally generate the levels because there was an awful lot of content, but we had to, again, we were always aiming for that 90 frames a second to make sure that it was as smooth as possible. So there was a lot of work about how we can cheat the depth of that environment. A lot of it is a mixture of a lot of mist and some billboards, but we all agreed that if you were driving through the experience and you were spending your time looking left and right at the trees, then we'd failed making a good experience. So we weren't too worried, and thankfully that wasn't the problem. We had looked at VR in a car before. I should point out this is not how we QA'd this particular project, but we played with it a little bit before in the studio, so we were familiar with some of the do's and don'ts. As you can see, we've still got an Oculus camera there. The Holoride platform is fairly agnostic with hardware. They were using Oculus Rifts for last year's project. We actually had to set the Oculus Rifts up using the cameras, and then the cameras get put away in the boot because you don't need them once you're configured. And then there's some smart jiggery-pokery that connects the IMU of the vehicle, the IMU of the headset into one experience. So there are 2 PCs in the backs of the cars. They're hooked up to the battery, and then there's some additional engineering that changes the voltage and makes sure the PCs don't explode, etc. And there were 2 people in the back of each car. We also did, as I mentioned earlier, once we realized that our monsters had to be flying monsters, that introduced kind of a series of concept art and R&D. We were thinking about how they move, how they come at you, how they interact, and how they get shot. The NBC guys wanted a lot of monsters, and as anyone knows who builds anything like that, a lot of characters means a lot of work or a lot of slowdown, a lot of things on screen. It doesn't render well. But thankfully, we worked out a really nice way of being able to have kind of a central core monster, and then using smoke to disguise a lot of body parts, and flying, and we were able to kind of produce a good number of them in each scene at one time. So we played with different looks. This is slightly more ethereal. We ended up with something that was slightly more physical that you can actually kind of get a good old look at when you're using your weapon. Each of those characters had their own individual spline. I should mention that last year's experience was 3DOF, which was fine. And you have to hold your weapon central to your chest, and that has a number of different disadvantages and benefits in the sense that you're less likely to hit your friend in the face when you're shooting a monster. But we've since adapted it to 6DOF, and actually as a standalone 6DOF experience, it's brilliant because you get to look the bride in the eye and you get to engage a lot more with the monsters. And then we had to have an end-level baddie, which is Dracul, as it was written. So this is a much bigger, more ethereal being that kind of floats above you as the car's going through its journey. And then his kind of, I suppose, power or his weapon allows him to pull all these different monsters together. So this was actually the number that we kind of end up with. We play fast and loose with some kind of visual trickery, but it becomes quite intense. You get caught in a kind of a maelstrom of monsters going around you. This is a final render. Obviously kind of a rendered version, not a real-time version, but this is kind of what he looks like. Sans legs. And an awful lot of smoke around him, but that's what we ended up working with. So that's what attacks you over 2 or 3 different waves. Am I okay to carry on?
Yeah, you keep going.
Okay. I'm kind of close to the end anyway, but so after a good 6 months of work, we flew over to LA. Ford were a co-sponsor, so they provided 10 Ford Explorers that each one of them had to get set up by HoloRide, so obviously IMUs, power, etc. And that was us on test week. And like I said, we were really, really surprised. Within a kind of 48 hours, we got it running. And there was some trouble with some drift with the controller. And it turns out the IMUs and the Oculus Rift handsets are actually just a bit average. They really, really heavily rely on the cameras. And of course, we'd hidden them, or HoloRide had hidden them. So occasionally your device would drift, but we've since kind of resolved that with Oculus Fs, and HoloRide are continually updating their SDK to make sure they want to get to the point where they're using wireless headsets, and you just come in and sling them on. So we're looking at possible Quest integration, especially with Quest integration with hand tracking, because there's even less things for your passenger to worry about. Because it's all about user experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that in a minute, actually, is how hardware manufacturers are going to be working with automotive manufacturers, because that, as we said, there's enormous potential in this sector.
Yeah.
So will we start seeing devices being tailored for the current car layout, or are we going to be waiting for a few years yet before we start seeing that?
We'll probably be waiting because we know how slowly because everyone will want to make their own, and then they realise they can't, and then it will happen.
Standards.
But they're all prepared now to integrate with third-party systems. So HoloRide, having come out of Audi, they have automotive relationships. So they're going around saying, "Give us access to your system. We can effectively plug your SDK straight in, and as long as there's power in the boot, then it makes that whole integration system a lot easier." It was taking them about a day and a half to set up each Ford Explorer per day, and obviously they want to get to a point where there's just a PC in a car and you're away. We had the privilege of working with a guy called Mark Crash McCreary, who you may or may not have come across. It's worth mentioning. But basically anything that you can think of in the late 80s and 90s that is cool, he designed. He designed Edward Scissorhands. He designed Danny DeVito's Penguin for Batman Returns. He concept arted for Jurassic Park, Terminator 2. So he was pretty hot shit. And there was a lot of guys in the studio who all were just like, fuck, it's Mark McCreary. And this is him testing it out for the first time.
Wow, you really feel like you're in it now. Oh, sorry, Bride. Holy fuck.
So he was the guy who was signing off the Bride design, the monster design, the look and the feel. So we had to be, we had to make sure we were playing our A game.
The starting and stopping is really cool. Oh, Jesus.
So after he gave the nod and everyone else at Universal gave the nod, it went live for 4 weeks at Halloween Horror Nights at the end of September. And the press was really good. Not least Nolan Bushnell, founder of Atari. He liked it. He checked it out. They had about 4,000 people over 4 weeks across 10 cars. And given that they were only doing late afternoon and evening sessions, and it was free, you just had to book online, and you could rock up, and it's 2 people a car. So we were really chuffed. NBC were really chuffed. Holleride were ecstatic. And there's a little video that kind of gives you a little overview of how everything kind of came together, and you can see some content as well.
With the rise of ride-sharing and the push toward autonomous vehicles, the next tech playground might just be in the backseat of your car.
An immersive virtual reality experience incorporating data from the car's computer, whether that's turning, braking, or accelerating. Keep driving.
Need your help. Be ready.
It's like a theme park in the back seat.
Thank you very much. Oh, one more high on. So, yeah.
No, Neil, that's fantastic. I mean, I've got to say, being stuck on the M25 for 3 hours doesn't sound so bad now if you're going to be playing something like that. But that was an amazing insight into how you develop the project, the platforms that you're using. You've talked about some of the pitfalls, some of the things to bear in mind. You've shared an awful lot with us. I think we really appreciate that. I was going to say, what's next?
So we are talking to NBC about another experience for a vehicular IP. I'll let you decide what that might be, which is very exciting, and that would be, we would hope, a truly elastic experience with a ride-hailing firm across possibly kind of multiple cities, because once you've built it and the technology works, then theoretically you can release anywhere. So that's kind of bubbling along, but these things take time. From a technology point of view, we are looking at kind of building out the Elastic SDK so that we might think about converting the Bride. We'd love to bring the Bride to London, so we are very good partners with Epic, and I'm sure everyone knows that they just opened their lab space in Fitzrovia. There is one of the things I'm really trying to do is sort out a London-based demo for a week-long session out of Fitzrovia, and that will be the Bride, and that might be Elastic, but it might be a locked route around London. So because it's it's great to talk about it. It's great to watch it on the screen, and the 6DoF static version is actually brilliant, but it's not the same as being in a car. So we are looking to bring this experience to the UK, and we're really keen to talk to brands, partners, IP owners about how you could leverage your IP and that content into something like this, because it's genuinely brilliant. I can't say enough about what it's like, kind of putting your headset on and feeling every bit of inertia and having it replicated within the experience.
Fantastic, Neil. Okay, so if we want to get more information, we can get it from your Twitter and on the website, rewind.co.
Rewind.co.
Please give Neil from Rewind a big, huge applause. Thank you so much. Love it.